I'm not an historian, but luckily, I'm not here to tell you about the most important civilizations throughout history. I'm only here to tell you which ones I think should make it into Civ 7. But the Civs I suggest are never going to appear in this game as such. What do I mean by that? Well, for the most part, I'm going to look at the big name Civs as opposed to the more granular approach of Civ 7. For example, the game doesn't have the Arabians, whatever that ever meant. It has the Abbasids. We don't have India, we have Maurya India, Chola, and Mughal India. Part of this is about being more historically accurate, but it's also due to the splitting of leaders from civilizations. Now, some civs that have no major leaders to speak of, at least none that we know, can come into the game. This has a particular relevance for some ancient civs that have had a hard time breaking into the Civ series. But I've been trolling through the Civs games of the past, and so the Civs I will list here are going to be the brand name ones. I also want to suggest, though, some that might finally make the cut with the major changes to gameplay. With the new year coming, it's appropriate to speculate about what Firaxis might have coming in the year, or years ahead. I can tell you that the game will continue to avoid some civs because they are simply too controversial and politically charged, even in game form, which is in some cases unfortunate. The prime example would be the Israelis of Antiquity. We have a slew of potentially interesting leaders, and there have been plenty of mods over the years to reflect this absence. But it ain't going to happen. And I understand why, even though it does leave a hole in ancient history. Meanwhile, if you're curious, the game I've got running while we discuss this wish list is one with Ada Lovelace and the mod Civ Sumer from the Googles Do Nothing. It offers a strong science build with you receiving writing the second you build your first city. It's one of my favorite mod civs. So let's start with both possibly returning game civs like Sumer, as well as some that have never been in the game as a complete civ. If you like Antiquity, it's hard not to get a little nostalgic for one of the oldest civilizations. And with them, you have the Babylonians and the Akkadians, all coming out of the same Mesopotamian starting area. Right away, we have the dilemma of too many good civs coming from the same place, all of them ancient. How could we choose if only one of them could make the cut? Not only that, but we already have Assyria, a northern Mesopotamian civ, and it could possibly duplicate some of the strengths of these other civs. Does that mean that none of the other three will get into the game? That'd be disappointing, I think. At least the Hittites are not directly related to the Fertile Crescent and offer a sizable civilization that we should consider. They've not appeared in any of the main Civ games except as the city-state Hattusa, and yet would be fun to play in terms of their efficient organization, early adoption of iron, and those cool three-man chariots. Go back even earlier and you have the Indus River Valley civilization, or the Harappans. They were a culture that appeared to function without an overall ruler, and they've only been represented in the games as the city-state Mohenjo-Daro. I strongly believe it's time for these guys to get in the game. And those of you who follow this channel know how I feel about the Minoans. I think it would be easy to distinguish them from Aksum as a trade civ whose cities have no fortifications. You can see my proposal for their build in the video I've linked to in the description. And you gotta love that volcano bias. Then, if we get Alexander in the game as a leader, I think Macedonia can't be far behind. If you look at the build for Civ 6, it has a good blend of militaristic characteristics and scientific ones, among other things. I think they could be a good balanced expansionist civ. Then, in no particular order, we've got the Gauls, the Huns, the Vandals, and the Goths. Some of the Romans' least favorite names. I think there has to be room for at least one of these peoples, not to mention the Picts, who hammered at Hadrian's Wall. Then there are the Celts, one of those grab bag terms that I suspect is not a good fit for this version of the game. Even to narrow things down to the Irish, the Welsh, the Scots, or the Angles and Saxons might not be enough. But if any of these civs had gotten the game, they'd be a welcome addition. It goes without saying that Byzantium is too important to ignore, and it could easily fulfill any of the victory conditions the game can throw at it. On the other hand, a more specific civilization would be the Nabateans. You know, the merchant people who built Petra. The wonder would finally have a true home in the game. Meanwhile, I'd love to see the Aztec return, and I would throw in the Olmec as well, and maybe even the Carol Supe, otherwise known as Norte Chico. Of these, the Olmec are the most interesting to me, simply since they are relatively well known among history hangers-on, but have never been included in the game. If I had to narrow down my antiquity preferences, though, to just say 5 civs, and that would be pushing it, I'd go with the Minoans, the Harappans, the Hittites, Sumer, and pick a Celt, any Celt. Very traditional picks, I suspect. As we move on into Exploration Age civs, I'm a little less wide ranging. I think it would be interesting to do a civ like the Bedouin, who, while related to the Abbasid, offer a dramatically different culture. A nomadic culture would be a challenge to render, but it would make for a new play style. Two of the big Exploration Age hitters are Portugal and the Netherlands, either of which would make for a strong economic power alongside some expansionist proclivities. Plus, the Dutch offer a side order of science, and both civs have culture to spare. But when it comes to European civs, the one I would most like to see is the city-state Florence. I highlight Florence's strengths in all fields in a video I've linked to in the description below. But I want to reiterate here how cool it would be to have a one-city civ that inherited that mantle from Carthage and used its influence to manipulate the independent powers to do its bidding in one way or another. I mean, one of its favorite sons, Machiavelli, is already in the game. Then we could add Da Vinci and a whole new way to play this civ. Something to think about, I hope. The last civ on my exploration list is the Iroquois Confederacy. I know they've already been in Civ 5, but I think they were a little undercooked. After all, their federated government was the model for the US government and even the Canadian Confederated version. Our cultures owe a lot to these guys. Then add on their military strength and their trading prowess, and you have a strong overall culture to contend with. If I had to pick only one of these 5 civs, I guess I'd go with Florence, simply for the wildly different approach to conquest and diplomacy. Into the modern era, I don't have nearly as many suggestions, at least not yet. The civilizations, countries, cultures that came into their own in the modern era are harder to delineate, but I'll give it a shot. I think Canada is the obvious choice for me. Duh. But I have to admit, it was not a significant player until after the apparent 1945 end of the game's current modern age. I think it only becomes a viable choice if Civ 7 adds another segment to the modern era, or does a contemporary age. In any case, I like the culture diplomacy approach all around. In the same vein, I think Australia would be great to have back, especially if the modern age has expanded somewhat to include the last several decades and the near future. Australia has been a model of hardiness and culture, sharing some of the same broad characteristics as Canada in terms of its leadership role. Then you have Brazil, a very different civ that I see as a cultural expansionist in terms of it being one of the largest countries in the world and bursting at the seams with cultural possibilities. If the point is to have a variety of approaches to building a civilization, I think Brazil should be in the middle of that. Ultimately, I think the lack of modern civilizations in my brain is simply because the states that have had the most impact in the last couple of centuries were founded long ago, and the new countries that have come into existence have not had the time to establish themselves in the same way. That was the charm of a game where you could begin with ancient Greece and carry them into the 21st century and not be too concerned about them having an impact over all that time. But another thing, maybe the most important thing that I became more aware of while making this pretty shambolic list is that I don't have the same kind of brand loyalty I used to have for civilizations. I look at the most recent civs introduced into the game: Scylla, Qajar, Tonga, the Republic of Pirates, Iceland, and the Ottomans. And I realize I'm less interested in franchise long loyalty than I am in interesting and varied gameplay. I mean, who would have predicted that Scylla and Tonga would be among my favorite civs in this game? Who knew that Iceland would be the Viking civ I had been waiting for from the start? Who knew the Republic of Okay, that one was a no-brainer. I predicted I would love that one when the first rumor hit. So, forget everything I've said in this video. What I want, and what I think many of us want, is civs that make us rethink the game in some way. And I think, without blowing too much smoke up too many derrieres, is that the latest civs reflect the inherent fun of the game in trying to integrate real history into math that looks so pretty and has so many quirks to it. In any case, this has been Civilized Raccoon. If you've liked what you've seen or you've heard, drop a like or a subscribe down below, and I'll see you next time.